Hello everyone, I'm honored to be here today. My talk today is titled From Gender Discourse to Inclusive Representation, a sociolinguistic analysis of gender equality strategies in the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So in my session, I'd like to invite you to think about the powerful force that shapes now how we see athletes, not medals, not records, but language. So before we get started, a few words about myself. I'm a linguist, translator, and language service provider, working across Chinese, English, French, and Japanese. I've worked in both localization and translation, where I need to pay special attention to language equality and expression fairness. And most importantly, for this research, I served as language services coordinator for the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And that experience, combined with my master's in translation and applied linguistics, inspired the work I'm presenting today. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to explore together today. We'll start by thinking about what we want to know to dig into this topic. Then we'll look at the history of women's participation in the Olympic and Paralympic Games to understand where the inequality began. And then we move into the heart of the talk, language. We'll look at how words are used in institutional texts and how they can reinforce or challenge gender stereotypes. Then we'll ask, where do we stand today? Has inclusive language actually changed anything? And what still needs to be done to make the Olympic movement truly equitable for everyone? So this is not just a linguistic case study, but it's also a reflection on power, visibility, and the role we all play in shaping the stories that matter. Finally, I'll bring you to a conclusion. So what are we really asking? We want to know, first, what have been the main historical and contemporary challenges to the integration of women in the Olympic and Paralympic Games? Secondly, what are the sociolinguistic issues related to gender issues in sport? And what inclusive communication strategies have been implemented by the IOC or the International Olympic Committee and the Organizing Committee of Paris 2024 to promote gender equality in sport? And what are the gaps and obstacles in this process? Let's look back. Women first competed in the 1900 Paris Olympics, only 22 of them, and only in tennis and golf. And then in 1984, the women's marathon was added. And by 2012, women could compete in every Olympic discipline finally. And last year, Paris 2024 was the first Games to aim for full gender parity, but that doesn't mean equality is complete. When it comes to Paralympics, parity is still a challenge. The number of women participants is increasing, but slowly. In Paris 2024, 48% of events are exclusively female, which is progress, but still reflects structural barriers in power sport for women. It's not just about numbers, and there are gender stereotypes, unequal medical access, underrepresentation in coaching, and institutional sexism. Female athletes often receive less recognition and are frequently framed in ways that reinforce gender roles. So that brings us to language. Think about how athletes are described. Women, graceful, elegant. Men, powerful, strong. Even in images, women are often hyper-feminized. These representations don't just reflect reality, but they shape it. Here, I used John Austin, a British linguist, theory of performativity. When institutions say, for example, we are committed to gender equality, they are doing more than making a promise, but they are performing a value. But does that performance lead to real change? That depends on context, authority, and whether actions match words. To understand how institutions approach inclusive language, I also analyzed key prescriptive texts. Official guidelines are aimed to shape how people speak and write. like manuals and recipes, for example. These texts are not just symbolic, but they're designed to influence real communication practices, how athletes are described, how media reports are written, and how gender is framed across languages. I used a framework by the French linguist Jacques Lopla to assess these texts across two dimensions. First, internal analysis, which is to explore the structure of the text, its clarity, and its organization. Is the text well presented, easy to read, and is the vocabulary accessible to everyone? Secondly, external analysis to check whether the rules defined in the text are applied in practice. Can users really follow these instructions? Are these guidelines realistic and relevant in practice? So, language doesn't act alone, but images are performative too. I looked at how visual materials create meaning, what is shown, what is not, and how it's framed all affect public perception. Especially when it comes to gender, we often assume that images simply reflect the world around us, that they show reality. But in fact, images don't just represent reality, but they help create it. They influence how we understand gender, power, identity. This suggests what is normal, what is desirable, and who belongs. And this is what we call the performative power of images. They don't just show something, but they do something. Now let's connect this idea to a linguistic theory that helps us understand how language itself produces meaning. It comes from John Austin, who introduced three kinds of speech acts: locutionary, illocutionary, and perlocutionary acts. It sounds complex, but it's actually quite simple and intuitive. Locutionary is the basic act of saying something. For example, she is a strong athlete. That's the utterance itself. And illocutionary is the speaker's intention. Maybe I want to praise her, or maybe I want to challenge a stereotype. And perlocutionary is the effect it has on the listener. Does it inspire respect? Does it change someone's perception of what a female athlete can be? And when we apply this to images, we can think similarly. What does the image show? What is this trying to convey? And how does it affect the viewer? So when an say Olympic campaign shows a woman smiling in a domestic scene and a man mid-action in a competition, the image may seem innocent, but it's performing something. So it's reinforcing roles. It's shaping the way we think about who gets to be seen as powerful and who doesn't. And that's why inclusive communication isn't just about checking boxes or avoiding bad words. It's about consciously shaping perception with our words, with our images, and with the stories we choose to tell. Due to time constraints, I will skip the specific analysis process and directly show you my research conclusions. So inclusive language in the Olympic movement has shifted from symbolic gesture to strategic policy, but challenges remain. The Olympic movement is the collective of organizations, athletes, and institutions led by International Olympic Committee that work together to promote Olympism and organize the Olympic Games in accordance with the Olympic Charter. So where are we now? IOC and NOCs have adopted inclusive editorial guidelines. There is parity in athlete numbers and gender-neutral communication targets. There is increased visibility of women athletes in media and official documents, but sadly, non-binary and trans identities remain underrepresented. And implementation is still uneven across languages and platforms. Here is a practical example taken directly from the IOC's portrayal guidelines. So this chart gives clear, easy to follow, inclusive, gender, neutral languages when referring to athletes' roles in relationships. These recommendations, and it covers 4 key areas: people, pronouns, name and nouns, and adjectives, and shows both what to avoid and what to use instead. But still, challenges remain. Though, for example, while the IOC and Olympic organizing committees may publish inclusive language guidelines, other actors like international sports federations, corporate media, and national broadcasters are not legally bound or institutionally required to follow them. Each organization operates with its own editorial standards, cultural norms, and communication strategies. So this means that even if the IOC promotes gender equal language, the actual implementation varies widely depending on the outlet, the country, and the federation. So as a result, the impact of these guidelines is limited by decentralization. They are influential but not enforceable across the full Olympic media and sports ecosystem. And also, in some cultures, it is not easy for people to accept gender-inclusive language. Let's take a moment to talk about something that doesn't get said enough. That in some cultures, it's just not that easy to accept gender-inclusive language. And it's not because people are necessarily against equality, but it's often more complicated than that. First, language is personal. It's tied to how people grow up, how they express themselves, how they feel connected to their culture. In languages like French, Spanish, or Arabic, for example, grammar itself is gendered. Every noun is either masculine or feminine. So when you say let's make the language more inclusive, it's not just about changing words, but it feels like changing the whole structure of how people think and speak. So some people push back, not because they hate the idea, but because it feels foreign, it feels awkward, or even like a threat to tradition. And there's also the cultural side. In some societies, gender is seen as very fixed, men or women, nothing in between. So when inclusive language brings up ideas like non-binary identities, some people feel uncomfortable. They think, why are we doing this? Is this political? Is this going too far? And then there's the institutional resistance. So if the top language institution says no, it's hard for schools, media, and even individuals to say yes. So yeah, changing language is emotional. It's not just grammar, it touches on identity, power, even national pride. So, but that discomfort is also a sign that change is happening. And while resistance is real, so is the movement, especially from young people and grassroots communities who are finding new creative ways to make language more equal. And also, because my research was done in France during the Paris Olympic Games, I interviewed some of the practitioners of this field. And what I learned is that sometimes the French Academy is a hurdle to gender inclusive language because it promotes a conservative view of the French language, opposing changes like gender neutral or non-binary forms that challenge traditional grammatical norms. So it's time to draw a conclusion. What is fine in my research is that, first of all, women fought for entry into the games, but gender inequality persisted across time and language reinforced stereotypes and exclusion. But we explore the power of discourse and representation, inclusive strategies by IOC and Paris 2024, and the concept of performativity. The tools I used in my research are prescriptive texts and image analysis. What we still need to pay attention to now is that inclusive language is evolving but unevenly. Trans and non-binary voices need visibility, and communication must be intentional, not symbolic. So the work continues and it begins with the language. So thank you all so much for your time, your attention, and your openness. It's been a real honor to share this work with you. My deepest thanks also go to the organizers of the Diversity and Innovation Conference for creating this space where voices from different disciplines and backgrounds can meet, question, and grow together. So I hope today's talk has sparked ideas or reflections for your own practice, and I warmly welcome any thoughts and conversation you would like to continue after the conference. So thank you again, and I hope we'll stay connected in the future.